Welcome to Marin Poets Live. I'm Neshama Franklin. I work at the Fairfax Library and I love poetry. After this program airs on TV, it will appear on the Marin Free Library website as part of a digital archive, which also features biographies of the poets and links to our collection. For this month's program, we will feature Terry Lucas. And welcome, Terry. Here we are. And as you may know, we start with a Marin poem, and I bet you have one for us.
I do. Thank you, Neshama. It's great to be on Marin Poets Live.
Okay.
This poem is from my first complete book, In This Room, and it's entitled Dream Ending with a Line by Charles Wright. And your listeners will recognize a couple of landmarks from Marin. 3 a.m. again, sitting at my desk, writing down a dream. From the far ridge, a coyote empties itself into the ravine, vowels more ancient than the distance between us. I return to bed and search for more memories beneath my pillow, while the sun, crouched somewhere behind the Rockies, stalks redwoods, standing watch over the end of the continent. 6 a.m. Another dream insists I rise, get dressed, drive to my appointment with the trail I walk each day. On my right, the million-dollar homes that overlook the bay. My left, the billions-year-old ocean rising, reclaiming more ground with each king tide, lapping against cherry doors, beveled glass. I walk as fast and as far as I can in the time I have, keeping watch behind me, checking for speeding cyclists before I hear pavement's sibilant resistance, sometimes swearing I can catch a glimpse of dust rising through the eucalyptus and knobby tread and familiar gait of my own approaching death. Soon it will reverse. What was right will be left. The light so gauzy now in morning fog will sharpen against Mount Tamalpais' edge on my evening commute home, where I will drift back to the black beginning.
Wow, did you encompass a lot in there? And I love the subversive action of the king tide at the beveled glass, yes.
Right.
And I also was fascinated by Coyote emptying himself and the vowels. You know, that's all a coyote does, is vowels.
True.
So it's both primeval and very contemporary.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I actually walk the bike path in Mill Valley on a regular basis and experience that ocean on one side and the homes on the other.
That's great. Yeah. Well, what comes next?
Well, I'm going to read a couple of other poems from the same volume. Witness. This morning I watched my neighbor in her nightgown swing a 9-iron through the windshield of her husband's pickup truck, pull out the pitched blade and take repeated shots at the hood, double cab, oversized bed, leaving pock-marked dents as if the family's gabled home with peaked roof, the neatly trimmed copse of trees lining the property, even the children's jungle gym had been broken off our suburban diorama, leaving shards of jagged sky to come crashing down on his most valuable possession. It is a cold day, and the woman is expelling her breath in heaving clouds that appear perfectly timed to her swings, each one followed by the sharp report of clubhead against sheet metal. I envy her energy, since I am still on the porch in my robe with morning coffee, while my neighbor has already totaled a $50,000 vehicle. I wonder what secret she has discovered, what bank account or email or sales receipt unfolded while he sleeps, clueless to the damage done. And now the children are joining in their mother's lively performance, adding their small pings on the chrome rims with toy hammers, muted cymbal crashes on the headlights. I'd like to help out myself, go down into my basement and bring out a sledgehammer for the cause of her honor. But after all, there's a truck in my driveway that needs destroying as much as anyone's. So I simply watch as the man staggers out the front door, beer in one hand, axe over his shoulder, He takes a final guzzle before crushing the can and throwing it into the bed, cocking the handle down his back like a cleanup batter in the game of his life. Then locking his jaw, he takes a full swing at the front grill, which caves in with the amplified sound of a schoolboy's front teeth knocked out by the playground bully, the radiator dribbling out its oily green blood. Not content, the crazed man circles his crippled prey, slamming the axe into every undented square inch. His wife and kids, having scattered, watch him from the street, then slowly return like day laborers from a smoke break, pick up their tools, and as a wary team, take up the project of finishing off that truck. The man and woman working their way around toward each other now until side by side they are standing before their unlucky wreckage. Without intending, their hands touch. Laughter bursts forth like rain on an outdoor wedding that should have never taken place, both spoiling and saving it at the same time. Then the recoiling, her slapping him, his grabbing her wrist, the slipping and falling into the damp grass, the wrestling and rolling which turns into kissing, groping, the frenzy of mouths and legs that have not touched for who knows how long, taken inside, leaving the children crying in the yard, and me embarrassed of being the witness to so much love.
Wow. Did you actually, how much was it a seed of a poem and how much did actually happen?
Most of it was a seed of a poem and then my imagination.
Yes.
The epigraph after William Carpenter refers to a poem by him where the poet, the narrator, is standing on his porch and looks across the river at a man in disgust, probably with society, with his life, starts burning his house down. And he starts piling all of his possessions up and letting them burn. And he says, how dare he, be able to do that? And here I'm standing, watching it. I'm going to burn my house down. So he starts burning his own house down. And then the man on the other side of the river basically chickens out and calls the fire department. And he's angry now because he's got his house on fire. So the idea that you can watch something that your neighbor is doing and feel so much identity with it, so much empathy with it, that you feel the same feelings and want to do the same thing, was the idea that started me thinking about what other things could a neighbor see another neighbor do. And so the rest is just imagination.
But rich imagination and so specific, which, these are not poetical stuff. They're stuff of real life, which makes them much more interesting to me, frankly.
Last week, I gave a guest lecture and a panel and a reading at the new Dominican University MFA low residency program. And one of the panels that I was not participating in was on humor in poetry. And later that night, I read this poem. I always get laughter from a few lines in this poem. So I wanted shocked laughter, yes. So I wanted to read it early on to kind of set the tone.
What's next?
What's next? Okay. Another poem from in this room. This is called Break. It also has an epigraph after Kim Adenizio. She has a poem where she stands with her legs apart. It's called Target, I believe, and fires a gun and talks about the visceral feeling that you get when you have that much power in your hand. This is about a different activity, Break, after Kim Adenizio. It feels so good to break a rack of pool balls, to stand with your legs apart, stroking the cue between fingers and thumb, aiming at the tight diamond, then thrusting your pelvis into an explosion of red and purple and blue. It feels good to move in on the cue, chalk up your stick, pound the first ball into the corner pocket with enough draw to get shape for the next shot. Then another and another, and you no longer wonder why some real cool boys skipped school, how they ended up dead so soon. You can feel them in your body, the breaking sounds around the room like the splintering of bones, the firing of Berettas and Glocks, the jukebox wailing like mothers and fathers. And now you want to smash every cue in the house, rip the green felt off each slab of slate, take a hammer to the balls, a hatchet to the whirled grain table legs, douse the place with gasoline and strike a match, watch the smoke rise through the bright, silent sky, so high that nothing can reach it. But you're afraid the cloud might rain down as ash, feed trees to harvest for more pool halls. So you stand there, knocking in balls, until your stick feels light, innocent. Then you rack them up again.
So you look so mild-mannered, but inside is a raging fellow. And it's so interesting that it's both a celebration of testosterone,
Yes.
which Kim experienced with her gun,
Right.
and then it shows what happens when that gets bigger and awful.
Right.
So, you know, again, it encompasses very complicated things with a lot of action.
Right, right, right. And some of your listeners might recognize Gwendolyn Brooks' short poem, We Real Cool. Yeah, We Skip School. Yeah,
Yes.
so there was a reference to that in there.
I love those references. It's like little snatches of music.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
What's next?
Well, I'm going to move now to my latest volume, Dharma Rain. And I'm going to begin with a poem that's a cento. And some of your readers may not know that a cento is more assembled than it is written, because a cento is comprised of lines taken from other poets' poems, arranged both syntactically, of course, and ideationally. Both have to work in order for the poem to work, because each line is a borrowed line. This poem is almost self-referential. If you listen to it, you might think that the poem was talking about itself, what a cento is. All the lines are borrowed, including the title. The thing itself is taken from a Wallace Stevens poem, not ideas about the thing, but the thing itself. The thing itself. You know how hard it is sometimes just to walk on the streets downtown, how everything enters you, iron straight from the forge, fierce with tiny agitation, rain ringing like teeth in the beggar's tin, like a sinking ship drowning its lights, chalk beds, trilobites, giant ferns whir. The invisible, sponsored again by white isotopes, pockets, dragonflies, bread. There is no dictionary for this gathering. You might think you were Noah, failing to arrange a taxonomy of allergic substances. Our lives are like birds' lives, flying around, blown away, or some far horn repeating over water. Do we simply join our arcs the way a seed is pressed into a hole? Don't ask me any questions. I've seen how things blink quick, or quicker still, tracked under the brown fog of a winter dawn, follow the light, the twist and drop of blackbirds from the tree.
So none of those are your very own words?
Not a single
one. It's like a quilt or a collage or something?
There are lines by T.S. Eliot, Lorca, Kim Addonizio, Amy Gertzler, 19 lines, 19 poets. They're all listed in the
What a trip. I've
appendix.
never heard of that before, and it's a great exercise.
It is.
It's very charming.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'm going to move now to the final poem of that volume, To the Fog, which picks up on the word fog used in that particular poem, and this book ends the book, To the Fog. And then you wake up one morning to the fog, surrounding your house like a heaven, like the first time you drank a whole bottle of white wine alone. You get dressed for your walk down the path that you walk on each day. You look to the horizon, the shouting sun, now more like moon's soft song, one muted tone behind sky's veil. You notice the lichen-covered stones greeting each step, the geometry of downed limbs scratching at low tide, the snowy egret you surprise, plumed head turned on its side, sweeping the mud flats, improvising a way to catch breakfast in suffused light. All of this and more normally hidden in plain sight. But an orchestra's warming up behind the curtain, commuters leaning on shrill horns, distant sirens rising, the engines of this world revving up their clear intent to perform something short of a miracle. O fog of morning, hover in the hollows of this day. remain in its low places, to rise up again when we need not more, but less.
That's very, very delicious. I never thought of fog as that which obscures, that's what you don't want to see.
Right.
And then when you get the glimpses, they speak to you in a whole new way.
Right, right.
So, all hail fog.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true. The next couple of poems I'm going to read are taken from the middle section of Dharma Rain. Dharma Rain, basically the sections 1 and 3, were the poems that were left over from in this room. They just didn't fit. I felt like I'd worked on them a long time. They were pretty good poems, but they didn't match these poems. And I started arranging them on my den floor, on my study floor, and I said, you know, these go in section 1, these go in section 3. There's a middle section that's missing. So I had just read Becky Faust, our new Marin poet laureate's book, Paradise Drive, which is written entirely in the sonnet form. And I discovered, and I reviewed that book, by the way, and I discovered that the sonnet was a perfect vehicle for a long narrative arc because it shows in 14 lines small snapshots. It's almost cinema-like with little scenes. So I decided to write the entire center section in sonnets. And then I modified that a little bit because I strayed over into a couple of pantoums and a villanelle or two. But the story arc is basically about my growing up in a fundamental religious home and breaking free from that stifling religious background into a more universal, more all-encompassing spirituality. And so that's reflected in the form of these poems because they start with a sonnet that, although it is not in the form of a Shakespearean sonnet, the end rhymes are A, B, C, D, etc., like a Shakespearean sonnet. And then as the poems progress, the rhyme scheme just is destroyed, and I just tear it up, as well as the other forms. And finally, the last poem is a villanelle, and the 4 last lines are just shredded into pieces. So it kind of matches, you know, the unraveling of this fundamentalism. So I'm going to read the first 2. A couple of notes are necessary. BP stands for blood pressure. AFibs stands for atrial fibrillations. PVC stands for premature ventricular contractions. And of course, the last line, what hurt him into poetry, is a reference to Auden's line about Yeats, Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry. Meet Calvin, trained from birth in the most fundamental tenet of fundamentalism, fear. Calvin lit the other end of his existential candle by waxing intellectual. No tear allowed to drizzle over Sundays of frozen emotion, served up by the biggest father around, force-fed by a fanatical mother. Religious conversion, he faked it, as well as the claim he'd found the peace that passeth all understanding. Later, he lied about the call to preach, abstinence, celibacy, God's blessings, but not the adrenaline that forbade sleep, raised his BP, gave him AFibs, PVCs, not about what hurt him into poetry. The second, he couldn't play in dance band because dancing was a sin, but was allowed to take up the trumpet because it was the Lord's instrument played by angels to call forth plagues and woes in the book of Revelation. He practiced for hours each day on his cousin's beat-up blessing. Private lessons went so well, his father bought him a new constellation. The next day, after warming up on Stardust, his trumpet teacher told him that he really must play the song about love that night at the fall concert. After school in the empty band hall, he closed his eyes and blew through tilted-up bell, the way he'd seen Maynard do. He envisioned sinners slow dancing, a darkening moon, each note calling down a star from the molten sky.
So when I heard the name Calvin, I thought of Calvinism.
Of course.
Of course. But is this a Calvin you know? Or you just
no,
inserted Calvin there?
Calvin is the name of the character in
this
middle section.
Right.
And of course, I do have an epigraph by John Calvin that kind of begins that. It talks about predestination and souls and that kind of thing.
There's so much, again, there's so much crafted rage in there.
Crafted rage,
Yes,
that's well
I
put.
love it.
It is. And you know, it's so handy, some of the words in this poem. Blessing, for example, happens to refer to the E.K. Blessing Company of St. Louis, Missouri, that for over 100 years has made brass instruments, trumpets. And how lucky for a poet that the name of their company is Blessing. Indeed. So I can use the term both ways. So, and of course, Maynard refers to Maynard Ferguson, the Canadian trumpet player that tilted his bell almost straight up, you know. So, yeah.
And it's kind of like we get it or we don't.
Right.
But you got it, and that's the important thing. And it resonates underneath.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, I couldn't be complete here without reading the title poem to Dharma Rain. And I'm going to read the epigraph and then just speak a word or two about it, because many of your listeners and watchers will be familiar with the Tassajara Zen Center. And so I'm going to read the epigraph. In the summer of 2008, when wildfire descended on Tassajara Zen Center, the oldest Zen monastery outside Asia, the Forest Service evacuated all residents. 5 monks turned back and met the fire, saving Tassajara. That's adapted from the book Fire Monks, Zen Mind Meets Wildfire at the Gates of Tassajara. And of course, many people know that story about how the fire monks did save Tassajara. And the important word is there, they didn't fight the fire. They met the fire. Yes. And this poem begins, section 3 of this book, where the spirituality of this young boy Calvin that was so stifling has now opened up into a more universal way of looking at life and looking at spirit, not religion so much, but looking at spirituality. And the rest of the book deals with spiritual themes, like I said, on a more universal basis. A couple of words necessary for explanation. Dharma Rain was the nickname that the monks gave to the homemade sprinkler system that was made with PVC pipe, where they pulled water from the creek, and they called the water granite wine, where they soaked the buildings 3 weeks prior to the fire descending. So when the fire got there, the buildings were already so saturated with water, it had created its own atmosphere in the valley that was humid, that almost snuffed the fire out as it came down. So a couple words there I just wanted to explain. Dharma Rain. And it's spoken in 2 voices. The first half is spoken to the fire, and then the second half of the poem is spoken in the voice of the fire. It was Dharma Rain met you. Dharma Rain from granite wine, pumped from the creek through PVC pipe, soaking wooden buildings, dirt, stone, skin, sprinklers, the sound of sustained violins, strings creating their own sultry atmosphere. Your fiery brass choir waiting for the director's baton to cue you in. It was the Fire Monk Jazz Quintet rearranged the score, reharmonized the minor chord flame song, jump, jive, and waylon fire hose saxophones, swinging with your drive-in hot rock rhythms and log-rolling bass notes, cascading down into the smoke-filled Tassajara Gulch. The whole valley smelling like the world's original singe. You up on the ridge, ripping off red blouses from manzanitas and madrones, becoming more aroused with each naked limb, each torso exposed in firelight. You crowned them one by one, but couldn't penetrate the V-shaped ravine, though you tried like a groom on his wedding night. But in the end, more out of duty than desire, you stumbled drunk into the bed of the garden, soft glow buried in her loam, her mist. Conceived a flash between earth and sky, I smoldered 3 days beneath dust, born hungry for live oak, sycamore, maple, compelled to carve paths through the chaparral, maroon-barked manzanita, chamis, ceanothus, yucca, to enlighten all flesh in my oven mouth. In one breath, to translate 1 trillion tree lines, 1 billion pages of bay laurel into fire beetles and whispering bells. O Tassajara, when your lanterns were lit along the Ngawa surrounding your zendo this morning, I saw you, the frost of your skin, your body, your vulnerable ground, fire monk boots making little Buddha shapes in the wet dirt. I saw your treetops aligned like piano keys, each taut string tied to nothingness, waiting for my vermilion fingernail touch. Then I turned to the moist commerce of your temple gate and yurts, sheds and chemicals, pine rooms and cabins, birdhouse and pool, your schist stone Buddha, eyes brushed closed, buried in the bocce ball court, calling down my parched tongues to lap your Dharma rain, your granite wine, to suckle the icicle of you.
That's a very sexy poem.
Thank you. That last line, I referred to an epigraph by Dogen Zenji. What is reality? An icicle forming in fire.
Yes. Are you a musician?
I am a musician.
I thought so. What do you play?
Well, I played trumpet as a child. That Calvin story is about 70% true. And I played piano a little bit and played guitar most of my life. So.
And it shines through your poetry.
Thank you so much. That's about the best compliment I can get.
Oh, you have a little one for us to
I
end
do
with?
have a closing poem. My 50th high school reunion is this fall. I've been asked to read this poem there because 1967 was my graduation year. 1967. I hear it mostly in the deep guttural tailpipes of Fords and Chevys, revving out of a Friday afternoon high school parking lot in a small New Mexican desert town. Sunset Avenue pulsing like a neck vein that leads to the heart of downtown, where Main Street pumps cars all night, stoplight to stoplight, between the A&W drive-in and the Tasty Freeze. Engines overheating, then finally boiling over in ice-patched 2 a.m. driveways, cooling down with the ticking sounds of shrinking metal, rebuckling of belts, rehooking of bras. I'd like to talk to the boys behind the wheels, the girls curled up on humps between bucket seats. I'd like to tell them there is nothing out here in 2017 except what they bring with them, how they should climb out now and start packing. The juniper's needle leaves never pressed between pages of a Bible, the scorpion's breath exhaled through abdominal stigmata, sand swept from sagebrush roots, lifted by the twisting fist of a dust devil, all collecting in luggaged silence. I'd like to tell them how there will always be enough falling brimstone, lakes of fire, flaming bushes, wilted flowers, how there will always be enough gods to punish them for putting their tongues to the warm clay, to turn them to salt for glancing back while walking away. How, when asked, "Where are you? What have you done? Who told you that you were naked?" What they will need most will be to learn to love the questions.
Wow, you brought us in right on time with riffs and muscle and juice. Thank you, Terry Lucas.
Thank you, Neshama, for having me.